Hello everyone, my name is Kaye and I'm a movement therapist. Today I would like to speak to you about diastasis recti, separation of vertical tummy muscles, which can happen after a pregnancy. In fact, during a pregnancy, most ladies experience a degree of separation of tummy muscles, but sometimes after the birth of a child, those muscles do not come back together. And the obvious presentation and how this comes across is that kind of more poochy kind of belly that women tend to really strongly dislike, a somewhat pregnant look that we tend to go, oh my goodness, how do I get my belly back into flat shape? It's important to notice that diastasis recti can affect not just ladies who have recently had a baby. It can also affect people who haven't had a baby. It can affect men. It can affect sports women who are overloading their abdominals in a certain way that causes them to shear apart. So actually the reasons behind this is not very good form and overusing certain areas of the abdominals. But even with a pregnancy, it's important to realize that it's not the pregnancy as such that's to blame. It's a bit like the final straw. If conditions exist that those muscles, the body mechanics are such that they are ready to separate, at the load of a pregnancy, the separation will happen. If the conditions persist for those muscles to not come together, they might not. And therein lies a problem, because we think the pregnancy is to blame, but it's actually unraveling and revealing other layers in our body. So the fix for this condition, the healing post this condition, is actually a whole body approach. Why? Because the inputs into diastasis recti stem through the whole body. It is not just around the midline. We didn't do something wrong around the midline. There is something that's impacting the whole body in different ways for different people that result in this condition being created. So what are those inputs? And if we consider the fact that their inputs relate, and anyone can have those inputs, then it explains why that can affect not just postpartum, post-pregnant ladies. So the first condition that needs to be right for diastasis recti to be healed, we need to be very good at breathing. And the breathing that tends to happen with people with separated tummy muscles is breath into the tummy. So we might be breathing lower down, constantly stretching the abdominal wall and getting it to sink. So if you add that many times, 25,000 times a day we breathe, if all of that goes into the belly, then we're constantly pushing the abdominal wall. That's one thing. The second input, very much related to breathing, is the mobility of the rib cage. To heal diastasis recti, we need to be mobile in the rib cage. Why is that? That's because muscles that impact the abdominal wall attach to various layers of our ribs. In fact, they go from about 3 different layers typically. And if the rib cage is rigid, if it does not move, and if the breath does not expand and allow the rib cage to contract, like the proper rib cage breathing would have, you will necessarily have to either breathe into the belly, or you will breathe high up into the neck and shoulders, which is also correlated with high stress breathing. None of those types of breathing is ideal for our body. We don't want neck pain either, right? So rib cage mobility comes with ability to sensibly, nicely, fluidly rotate in both directions, left and right, side bend our rib cage, and also flex and extend the spine. So it goes together with spinal mobility as well. And if the spine is rigid, if the rib cage is really stuck and held, if the breathing is restricted, you can imagine that breath only goes one way. Again, typically into the belly, sometimes up into the shoulders, and we can't heal diastasis recti. So no matter then how many times, how many abdominal shortening exercises we do, we can't globally change the way our body functions at that level. The other things to notice is that we also need the ability to load our muscles, to create exertion in those abdominal wall muscles. So not protect them necessarily, we need to gently challenge them. And these three things are probably the most key important inputs. It's also worth noting that once we have those areas addressed, what we're aiming to generate as the very first step in healing diastasis recti is tension between the two separated halves of our abdominal muscles. There are many layers of belly muscles, but the ones we're talking about are the vertically separated muscles, so the two are sheared apart with connective tissues in between. The first step to healing diastasis recti is to be able to generate tension in the midline between the two halves of the separated muscles. And if the tension is absent, if those tissues are springy and your fingers dip down as this kind of sponginess underneath, then we're not able to currently load the tissues properly. Loading the tissues leads to strengthening the tissues. The body likes load. So the first step is the generation of tension between two halves of the rectus muscles. And only when we can reliably generate that tension, we can start looking at the cosmetic side of things, which is the kind of the more relative flattening of the belly. But it has to come in that order. If we are hankering after a flat belly, and I'm sure lots and lots of us are, but that sponginess in the tissues is still the same, what effectively is happening is if we are functionally not able to generate that load in the midline, then the torque between the left and the right side of the body, we're not transferring that force across one side to the other side of the body. It impacts everything. It impacts you standing on one leg. It impacts you walking, because that tension is not there. Your two halves of the body are kind of separate. So your body will struggle so much more to execute the tasks. And how do you check for tension? We have to be down on the floor. We have to have the knees bent and find the midline, typically around the belly button, probe with your fingers, and then lift up your head and your shoulders just a little bit without engaging your belly, and feel for the two halves of the vertical rectus muscle and gently poke, very gently poke down into it and see if you can feel your finger dips down and there's kind of sponginess underneath, or can you, using your body, create tension between those halves. You can create tension. You've got a functioning diastasis recti. That's a good thing to start off with. Creation of that tension is fantastic. If you don't know how to do this, then this is something you need to be assessed for and learn how to generate tension between the two halves of your rectus before you start loading all of that work into your belly. I hope that makes sense. Now, in terms of the exercises I recommend for addressing these concerns, first of all, ribcage movement is so important. I like to do things like rotation. So one exercise I like to give people is standing by a wall with your arms reaching forwards. Feet can be parallel to the wall or slightly looking away from the wall, And then you inhale and rotate your rib cage to open your chest and then close that rotation. So aim to work from your rib cage and not just throw the arm back and not just yank your pelvis into rotation. So think about mid-chest rotates. That's one exercise that's really good. The other one is side bending and learning to do this from the ribs and not from the hips like so. So there's a big difference between doing that movement, which is involving your hips and probably won't take your rib cage into this, or keeping the hips still and side bending. And then from here, we can also add rotation once you're in position. Learning to move your rib cage without involving the pelvis. So important. That's a good one to practice. The other input that goes into healing diastasis recti is looking at the overall posture and alignment. And quite often, people who have diastasis recti stand in a chest forward, back compressed type presentation. So if you look at how I'm standing now, that is a typical posture, exaggerated, of somebody with diastasis recti. So in order to encourage the healing, people need to learn to bring their tailbone into neutral and open up the front of the hips. So again, lots and lots of sitting down can lead to shortening of those hip flexors. So standing exercises or half kneeling exercises, such as one knee down and doing a stretch for the quadricep here at the front of the kneeling knee, is a good step forward to start releasing tightness in the front of the hip and learning to drop the tailbone whilst kneeling, as I call it, kneeling tall. So you're reaching out of that kneeling knee. And also what's really good is to strengthen the buttocks and the hamstrings. So that will be done with squats. Also a good one to practice, especially for people who are presenting with the tail up, overly lifted tail. So learning to drop the tailbone and sink into a squat, imagining that you're sinking back into a chair behind you without shifting the knees forward in a big way. Learning to keep the ribs in and keeping the spine long. So that's a good one to load the buttocks. But with all of these exercises, it's really important not to just go for these movements with a view to stretch, stretch, stretch. We need to incorporate all the breathing work that we do in order so that the tummy does not bulge out. So we have a sense of bulging the belly when we exert ourselves, because that's easy with diastasis recti, because we tend to over squeeze around the waist and the belly pops outwards on the exhale. We need to learn to discern when that bulging is happening and use the breathing so that the belly flattens and don't exceed the tolerance. So if the belly starts to flatten and then you add load and the belly pops up, we have lost that deep connection low down in the abdominal wall. And that's super important for healing diastasis recti. Doing all of these exercises with bad form so that the belly pops up is not going to help us heal. And that is the reason why certain sports people can actually end up with diastasis recti. They will do what is called the traditional abdominal strengthening exercises, those tummy crunches, which shorten the abdominal wall, but they will overuse the rectus muscles, the vertical muscles that is potentially sheared, but they might not necessarily generate that wonderful tension between the rectus. So actually what ends up happening is the oblique muscles that go sideways and the rectus muscles, they go and split with the exertion, and they can't be connected back together because of the imbalance of various abdominal muscles. Ultimately, diastasis recti is an imbalance of various layers of abdominal muscles, which can stem from poor breathing, lack of spine mobility, lack of ribcage mobility as the main inputs. So if you're not sure whether you can generate that wonderful tension in the midline, come and get yourself assessed, work with your healthcare professional, work with your trainer, or give me a call and we can assess you to see how we can help you move forwards from this. Remember that breathing drills is absolutely paramount to this. It is not something that's boring, it's extremely sexy because it activates your whole body's core when done properly. I wish you every success on your journey to healing your abdominal wall. If you've got any questions at any moment, please give me a call or reach out. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Kaye Woodgate and I hope you enjoyed this video. Bye for now.